The dawn bled across the Arizona sky, painting the mesas and canyons in copper light. A solitary figure knelt before a small mound of stones, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the awakening horizon. Silas Thornfield removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature gray, and placed a silver bracelet upon the cairn. The intricate band caught the first light of morning, its tribal patterns seeming to pulse with life against the lifeless earth. "Number 14, he whispered, his voice rough as desert stone. The bracelet bore symbols unknown to most white men, flowing lines depicting eagles in flight, mountains that breathed, and rivers that spoke. Silas traced the engravings with a calloused finger before covering the silver with a thin layer of red soil. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage and ironwood, mingling with the ever-present dust that coated everything in this unforgiving land. A gunshot cracked the silence, followed by distant whoops and hollers drifting from Copper Ridge. Silas's jaw tightened. Another auction day had begun. He stood, brushing dust from his worn denim, and turned toward the town. The morning sun illuminated the scar that crawled up the right side of his neck like lightning frozen in flesh, a souvenir from another life. The burn mark disappeared beneath his collar, but those who had seen it in its entirety knew it spanned half his chest, a permanent reminder of fire's unforgiving nature. Silas mounted his horse, a sturdy Mustang the color of thunderclouds, and urged it forward. He did not look back at the small collection of cairns stretching into the distance behind him, 14 in all, each marking not a grave but a promise. Copper Ridge had once been a mining town of promise. Now it was just another dusty settlement clinging to existence in the Arizona territory, populated by those too stubborn, too desperate, or too criminal to live elsewhere. The main street swelled with activity this morning, horses tied 3 deep at hitching posts, men in various states of sobriety arguing over the day's main event. Silas tethered his horse at the far end of town, away from the commotion. He walked with the measured pace of a man who preferred invisibility, hugging the shadow of buildings as he approached the town square where a rough wooden platform had been erected. A crude sign proclaimed, "Auction today, prisoners and contraband." The crowd parted unconsciously for Silas. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd seen enough violence for several lifetimes. Most knew him only as the blacksmith who lived on the town's edge, the man who could bend metal to his will, yet spoke fewer words than a desert stone. Some remembered he'd once worn Union blue in the war, maybe even served as a sergeant. Others whispered about his connection to Ezra Blackwood, the wealthy merchant whose wagons controlled trade throughout the territory. But nobody asked Silas directly. Something in those steel-gray eyes warned against prying. He took position at the back of the crowd, leaning against a post, watching as Sheriff Dobbs climbed the platform. The lawman's belly strained against his vest, badge glinting in the harsh sunlight. "First lot today," Dobbs announced, voice carrying across the square, "is property seized from the Reynolds gang last month. Got some fine rifles, ammunition, even a fancy saddle from back east." Silas scanned the crowd, recognizing the usual faces. Ranchers looking for cheap labor, miners spending their meager earnings on whiskey and dreams, merchants seeking profit in human misery. His gaze lingered on 3 men standing apart from the others, their clean clothes and straight postures marking them as outsiders. Blackwood's men. They weren't here for rifles or saddles. The auction proceeded with the expected rhythm of greed and opportunity. Goods exchanged hands, money flowed into the sheriff's lockbox, and men congratulated themselves on bargains secured through others' misfortune. Silas remained motionless, waiting. "Final lot," Sheriff Dobbs finally announced, gesturing toward the jailhouse. 2 deputies emerged, dragging between them a woman whose bound wrists didn't prevent her from struggling against their grip. They forced her onto the platform, where she stood defiantly, chin raised despite the blood caked at the corner of her mouth and the bruises darkening her copper skin. Her black hair had been roughly cut to shoulder length, but still framed a face of striking beauty and unconquerable pride. "Apache woman," Dobbs announced, grabbing her arm and turning her around like merchandise. "Caught with a raiding party near Fort Thomas. Governor says we can sell these hostiles to recover damages. Strong back, young enough to train upright." The crowd's mood shifted, laughter mixing with crude suggestions. Someone waved a half-empty whiskey bottle. I'll trade you this fine Kentucky bourbon for her. $2, another voice called. She won't last a week in a proper household, a rancher's wife muttered. Sell her for a cigar. It's more than she's worth. The woman's dark eyes surveyed the crowd, not with fear but with something far more dangerous, memorization. She was recording faces, logging debts that would someday come due. Silas felt his chest tighten when those eyes found him. For a heartbeat, recognition seemed to flicker in her gaze, then vanish beneath renewed defiance. She's wild but still breathing, Dobbs announced with a yellow-toothed grin. Who'll start the bidding proper? $5? The crowd's laughter swelled. $5 could buy a decent horse in these parts. I'll give you 2 bits, a miner called, generating more laughter. Tell you what, Dobbs said, yanking the woman forward. If there's no serious offers, boys at the Silver Spur been working hard all week. Maybe they deserve some company on the house. A group of cowboys by the saloon whooped in approval, their eyes glazed with alcohol though the day had barely begun. $2. The voice cut through the noise like a knife through fat, steady and low. The square fell silent. Silas stepped forward, the crowd parting further. 2 silver dollars glinted between his fingers as he approached the platform. $2, he repeated, barely the price of new boots, or one night's drink at the saloon. Dobbs squinted down at him. Thornfield, you want this savage? Silas placed the coins on the auctioneer's table. Not buying her, he said, loud enough for all to hear. Just buying your mercy. He climbed the steps and pulled a knife from his belt. The deputies tensed, hands moving toward their pistols, but Silas merely sliced through the ropes binding the woman's wrists. Her eyes met his, unflinching. You'll regret this, she said, her English perfect and cutting. I won't obey you. Something almost like a smile touched Silas's lips. I've regretted worse, he answered. Not today. He turned and descended the steps, not looking to see if she followed. The crowd's stunned silence gave way to murmurs, then open laughter. Thornfield's lost his mind. She'll cut his throat by dawn. Silas ignored them all, walking steadily back toward his horse. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps behind him. Didn't offer help when she struggled to keep pace with her sore limbs. Only when they reached his Mustang did he finally face her. You can ride double or walk, he said. Your choice. She studied him with eyes that missed nothing. I'll walk. Silas nodded once and mounted, guiding his horse at a slow walk beside her as they left Copper Ridge behind, the sun climbing higher in a merciless sky. The smithy stood at the edge of town, a squat building of stone and soot where the clang of hammer and anvil had once been the heartbeat of Copper Ridge. Lately, that rhythm had grown less frequent. Silas had taken fewer jobs, spending more time on personal projects that never seemed to leave his forge. He dismounted, leading his horse to the small corral beside the workshop. The woman, who had maintained stubborn silence during their walk, stood in the yard, taking in the modest homestead with calculating eyes. There's water in the barrel, Silas said, gesturing to a rain catchment system along the side of the building. Washroom's out back. I'll find you some clean clothes. She said nothing, but her gaze followed him with predatory intensity. Inside his workshop, Silas moved with the ease of long familiarity, stoking the banked coals of his forge until orange light spilled across the cluttered space. Tools hung in precise order along the walls. Half-finished metalwork lay on benches, horseshoes, hinges, a rifle barrel in need of repair. In the corner, partially hidden behind stacked firewood, stood a small iron box with a heavy lock. He retrieved a worn shirt and trousers from his sparse living quarters attached to the workshop, then filled a tin cup with water from his personal supply. When he emerged, he found the woman exactly where he'd left her, as if she'd turned to stone. Here, he said, placing the clothes and water on a bench. Name's Silas Thornfield. She took the water, but ignored the clothes. Why did you do it? Silas turned toward his forge, checking the temperature of the coals. Because someone had to. A dry laugh escaped her, devoid of mirth. You think $2 buys back what they took? The hammer Silas had just picked up paused midair. The forge's flame flickered across his features, softening the hard angles of his face. No, he said quietly, but it stops one more wound later. He returned to his work, the rhythmic striking of metal filling the silence. Each blow precise, measured, like penance. She watched him work until the shadows lengthened, neither accepting nor refusing the clothes he'd offered. Finally, she spoke again. "My name is Ayana Nighthawk." Silas nodded without looking up from his work. "There's food in the house, bed too if you want it. I'll sleep in the workshop." "I'm not staying." "Never said you were. Door doesn't have a lock. You can leave whenever you want." Ayana's eyes narrowed. "You're a fool if you think I won't steal your horse." Silas finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "Maybe I am." As dusk deepened into night, Silas continued working long after most men would have stopped. The orange glow of the forge painted his face with tired light. Each strike of the hammer told a story of its own, one of regret, remembrance, and a debt no amount of silver could repay. Outside, the first howl of wind came down from the desert, carrying with it the promise of a long night ahead. Ayana sat wrapped in the blanket Silas had left by the door, watching the stars appear one by one. Her wrists were raw from the ropes, the marks already beginning to scar. She had not eaten his food or worn his clothes, but had washed the trail dust from her face and arms, the cool water a relief against her bruised skin. From inside the workshop came the steady rhythm of Silas's hammer striking metal. She closed her eyes, listening. There was something familiar in that sound, not the act itself, but the intent behind it. Each blow carried purpose, like a heartbeat determined to continue despite all reason to stop. She opened her eyes when the rhythm faltered, then ceased altogether. Through the workshop's single window, she saw Silas moving toward the door, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the forge's glow. Ayana slipped into the shadows as he emerged, heading not toward the house but to the small barn adjacent to the corral. He carried a lantern that cast long shadows across the yard. Silent as a hunting cat, she followed, keeping to the darkness. The smell of hay and horses grew stronger as Silas disappeared into the barn. She crept forward, peering through a gap in the weather-beaten boards. Silas hung the lantern on a hook and knelt before an old trunk pushed against the rear wall. From his pocket, he withdrew a key and unlocked the chest. Ayana leaned closer, straining to see what treasure a white blacksmith might keep hidden. Her breath caught as Silas lifted a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. He unfolded it with reverent care, revealing a square of cloth embroidered with a soaring eagle, the mark of her family clan. Confusion and suspicion warred within her. How had this white man come to possess such an item? Was he a collector of trophies taken from her people? Or something else? Before she could retreat, a board creaked beneath her foot. Silas's head snapped up, eyes finding the gap where she stood. "You might as well come in," he said, his voice betraying no surprise. Ayana hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, pointing at the embroidered cloth. Silas studied her face as if measuring something only he could see. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with years of carried weight. "It belonged to a boy," he said, "about 12 winters. He gave it to me 5 years ago, after I helped him escape a burning village." Ayana's heart stuttered in her chest. "What was his name?" "He called himself Dakota." The name struck her like a physical blow. Ayana stepped forward, seizing Silas's shirt with both hands. "Dakota Nighthawk? My brother, you lie." "I don't lie," Silas said quietly, making no move to free himself from her grip. "Not about this. My brother died when the Bluecoats attacked our village. Everyone died." Silas shook his head slowly. "Not everyone. Some escaped. Dakota was one of them." Ayana searched his face for deception, finding only a haunted certainty in those gray eyes. "Where is he now?" "East. I sent him with a family heading toward the Texas territory. Good people who owed me a favor. They promised to raise him as their own." "Why would you help him?" Her fingers tightened in his shirt. "Why would a white man help an Apache boy?" Silas gently removed her hands from his shirt. "Because it was right. Because I couldn't save everyone." His voice dropped lower. "Because I was there when it happened." The implication hung in the air between them, heavy as a thundercloud. Ayana stepped back, her hand instinctively moving to her hip where a knife would normally hang. "You were a soldier? One of them?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He carefully rewrapped the cloth and returned it to the trunk. When he finally spoke, his voice had grown distant. "I was a sergeant under Captain Ezra Blackwood." "I didn't know." He stopped himself. "That's not true. I suspected what he planned, but told myself we were just following orders. By the time I understood, it was too late for most. But not for Dakota. No, not for him. Not for a few others. Ayana's mind raced, reassembling pieces of a past she had believed set in stone. These others, where are they now? Some with Dakota, others scattered to different places, safe as far as I know. And you've been keeping track of them? Well, Silas closed the trunk, the lock clicking with finality. Penance, he said simply. Before Ayana could respond, a new smell cut through the barn's familiar odors. Sharp, greasy, wrong. Silas noticed it at the same moment, his head lifting like a hound catching a scent. Fire, he muttered, moving toward the door. Outside, orange flames had already engulfed the haystack beside the corral. The fire spread with unnatural speed, racing along a trail of oil toward the barn. Silas bolted for the water barrel, shouting for help that wouldn't come. Copper Ridge, barely visible in the distance, continued its evening revelry, indifferent to the destruction unfolding at its edge. Ayana moved with decisive speed, grabbing a horse blanket and soaking it in the water trough. She beat at the flames spreading toward the corral, while Silas hauled buckets to the barn door. The horses inside whinnied in terror, kicking at their stalls. "Get them out," Silas yelled, tossing her the keys to the stalls before turning back to fight the advancing flames. The fire roared with hungry determination, consuming the dry wood faster than their desperate efforts could contain it. Smoke billowed in choking clouds as Ayana led the panicked horses from the burning structure. The heat pressed against them like a living wall, driving them back step by step. By the time the flames finally died, the barn stood as little more than a blackened skeleton against the night sky. Silas stood amid the ashes, soot covering his face, the heat still licking at his boots. Behind him, Ayana's voice came soft but steady. "I know who did this." He turned. She was staring into the smoke, eyes reflecting the dying fire. "It's Blackwood," she said, "the one who bought and sold us." Her gaze moved to his face, searching. "The one you once rode with." Among the ashes lay a scrap of paper, its edges charred but the center intact, a receipt marked with the elaborate logo of Blackwood Trading Company. The night fell heavy between them, and for the first time in years, Silas Thornfield felt the weight of a past he had tried to bury rising again from the flames. They left Copper Ridge before dawn, the smoke from the burnt barn still clinging to the wind like a curse. Silas rode ahead, reins loose in one hand, a rifle slung across his saddle. Behind him, Ayana followed on the Mustang he'd managed to save from the fire. She rode straight-backed, silent, a strip of cloth covering the wounds on her wrist. Neither spoke for miles. The land spread endlessly around them, brittle mesquite, dry gullies, and far-off ridges blurred by heat. Somewhere behind those ridges lay the Mogollon Rim, where Silas meant to start again, or maybe finish what he should have ended long ago. When the sun climbed higher, Ayana broke the silence. "You didn't have to bring me." "I didn't," he said without turning. "You followed." Her voice was sharp like flint striking stone. "You think I trust you?" "I don't need you to." The horse's hooves thudded over dry earth. For a while there was only wind and the faint creak of leather. Then she spoke again. "Ezra Blackwood, he burned my village. He sold my people." Silas's shoulders stiffened, but he said nothing. "I saw his face that night," she continued, "and the soldiers who followed him." Her eyes fixed on his back. "Were you one of them?" His silence was louder than any confession. By noon they reached the rim of a canyon where the trail split into two narrow passes. Silas dismounted, studying the tracks in the dust. "We'll take the northern route, less open ground, more hiding places." "For them or for you?" she asked. He looked at her, then really looked. The dirt on her cheeks couldn't hide the fierce steadiness in her eyes. "You'll live longer if you stop thinking everyone's your enemy." "Everyone is," she replied, and nudged her horse past him. That night they made camp beneath a cluster of dead cottonwoods. The sky above was clear, black as cold coal, pricked with hard stars. Silas gathered wood in silence while Ayana crouched nearby, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a crude blade. When sparks rose from his flint, she flinched. He noticed. "You've seen too many fires," he said. She glared. "So have you." Neither spoke after that. The wind moaned through the branches, carrying the smell of ash and old ghosts. Before dawn, the sound of hooves woke them both. Silas reached for his rifle, motioning for her to stay down, but she was already moving, silent as a shadow. From the ridge above, two riders appeared, torches flickering in the pre-dawn darkness. Blackwood's men. Silas fired once, hitting the torch, not the man. The flames dropped, scattering sparks across the dry ground. The riders bolted into the darkness, shouting curses that echoed through the canyon. "They found us too quickly," Ayanna said, her voice tight with suspicion. "How?" Silas reloaded his rifle, eyes scanning the ridgeline. "Blackwood has men in every settlement from here to the New Mexico line. Someone in Copper Ridge must have talked. Or someone left a trail to follow." The accusation hung between them, another ghost in the darkness. Silas said nothing, but his expression hardened as he kicked dirt over their small fire. "We move now," he said. "There'll be more coming." They broke camp with practiced efficiency, erasing all signs of their presence. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they were already deep in the canyon, following a path few white men knew existed. Ayanna watched Silas navigate the treacherous terrain with unexpected ease, noting how he chose paths a tracker would find difficult to follow, how his eyes constantly scanned for signs others might miss. He moved not like a blacksmith, but like a man intimately familiar with both wilderness and warfare. "You're not just a soldier," she said when they paused to rest the horses. "You're a scout." Silas loosened his horse's saddle girth, giving the animal a moment to breathe. He corrected. "After the war, Captain Blackwood kept some of us on when he formed his trading company. We cleared routes, negotiated with tribes when possible, fought when necessary." His voice grew quieter. "Mostly we fought. Until the night of my village." He nodded once, the motion barely perceptible. "That was the last." "What changed? Your conscience suddenly appeared?" Silas met her gaze directly. "I never claimed to be a good man, Ayanna. I've done things I'll answer for someday. But there's a difference between war and slaughter. What happened that night wasn't war." "No," she agreed, her voice cold as winter stone. "It was theft. Blackwood wanted something from our land." Surprise flickered across Silas's features. "You know about that?" "I know my people have guarded the Valley of the Moon for generations. I know white men have sought it since my grandfather's time, and I know Blackwood will never stop hunting for it." Silas's expression grew somber. "Then we need to move faster. If he tracked us this quickly, he knows who you are and what you know." As they mounted again, Ayanna studied the man who had both participated in her people's destruction and saved her brother's life. The contradictions ran as deep as the canyon they traversed. A man marked by both cruelty and compassion, haunted by deeds he could never undo, yet still attempting redemption. "These silver bracelets you make," she said suddenly. "The one you left on those stones, what are they?" Silas's hand unconsciously moved to his saddlebag where more of the silver bands rested. "Remembrance," he said. "One for each person I couldn't save." "And the designs?" "Copied from what I saw in your village, each one different. I don't know what they mean, only that they seemed important." Ayanna was silent for a long moment. "They're not just decorations," she finally said. "They're words, stories, maps." Silas turned in his saddle, genuine surprise evident in his face. "Maps to what?" "To everything that matters," she replied cryptically. "Water, safety, home." Before Silas could question her further, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon, a rifle shot. A bullet splintered rock inches from his head. More shots followed, bullets kicking up dust around their horses' hooves. "Ride!" Silas shouted, spurring his mount forward. They galloped through the narrow passage, more shots ringing out behind them. Ayanna leaned low over her horse's neck, moving as one with the animal in a display of natural horsemanship. Silas followed her lead as she veered suddenly into what appeared to be a solid wall of rock. A hidden path, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The passage narrowed until they were forced to dismount and lead the horses through single file. The gunfire grew distant, then silent. When they emerged on the other side, they found themselves in a small box canyon, sheltered on three sides by towering cliffs. "They'll find another way around," Silas said, checking his rifle. Ayanna slid from her horse, moving to a pile of stones at the canyon's edge. She shifted several rocks, revealing a small hollow containing an ancient clay pot. From it, she withdrew a pouch of herbs and a flint striker. "What are you doing?" Silas asked. "Making it harder for them to find us." She crushed the herbs between her palms, whispering words in Apache that Silas didn't understand. Then she lit the mixture, creating a pungent smoke that she wafted around them and their horses. "This will mask our scent from their trackers." Silas watched with guarded fascination. "Will it work?" "It has for 1,000 years," she replied, her expression unreadable. "Unless you think your white man's ways are superior?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not out here." They continued through the network of canyons, Ayana now taking the lead. She moved with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory, occasionally stopping to point out signs invisible to Silas's eyes. A pattern of stones, marks carved into ancient trees, the flight of certain birds. As they traveled, Silas began to understand that what had seemed like wilderness to him was in fact a carefully mapped homeland to her, filled with markers and meanings known only to those taught to see them. By late afternoon, they reached a small spring hidden between two massive boulders. Water trickled from a crack in the rock face, collecting in a pool just large enough for their needs. They refilled their canteens and watered the horses in silence. When Ayana spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. "Why are you helping me now?" "Guilt?" Silas considered the question as he filled his canteen. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because Blackwood won't stop. Not with you, not with your brother or anyone else who knows about the valley." "And you think you can protect me from him?" "I think together we might have a chance." He capped his canteen and turned to face her. "You know the land and the old ways. I know Blackwood and how he thinks." Ayana studied him, her dark eyes penetrating. "You're not telling me everything." Silas hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a tarnished silver badge and a folded document. "After I left Blackwood's service, I worked with the Indian agency for a while. Tried to make things right, or at least less wrong." His voice grew tight. "Found corruption there too, but I made some contacts. People who might help us find your brother and the others." Ayana took the document, eyes widening as she recognized the crude map drawn upon it. "This is the route to Texas, where you sent Dakota." "Yes, and this," he pointed to a small mark near a river crossing, "is the last place I received word of him. Nearly a year ago now." "He's alive," she whispered, a statement rather than a question. Silas nodded. "As far as I know, but Blackwood has been systematically hunting down everyone connected to your village. I think he believes one of you will lead him to the valley." Ayana carefully refolded the map. "And will you? If I show you where it is?" The question hung between them, loaded with 5 years of history and blood. Silas's gaze didn't waver. "I've spent 5 years trying to undo what happened that night," he said quietly. "I've tracked and protected as many survivors as I could find. I've buried 14 markers for those I couldn't save. If you think I'd betray them, or you now, then kill me and take the horses." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Not yet," she finally said, "but I'm keeping this." She tucked the map into her clothing. As the sun began its descent, they prepared to move again, knowing Blackwood's men would be circling wider to find them. The box canyon had provided temporary shelter, but they couldn't risk staying through the night. "Where do we go from here?" Ayana asked as she mounted her horse. Silas checked his rifle one last time before slinging it across his saddle. "North toward the Mogollon Rim. I have a friend there, a trader named Nahele. Apache, like you. He might know more about your brother's whereabouts." "Nahele," she repeated, recognition flickering in her eyes. "The man with one eye, he still lives? You know him?" "He was a friend of my father's, a keeper of histories." Her expression grew thoughtful. If anyone would know about Dakota, it would be him. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the canyon, Silas noticed Ayana studying his scarred neck with new intensity. "What?" he asked. "Your scar," she said. "From fire?" Silas's hand moved unconsciously to his neck. "Yes, the night of your village. I went back into a burning lodge to pull out a child. Beam collapsed." "The child survived?" A shadow passed across his features. "Yes, I count her among the saved, not the lost." Ayana nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. Then she reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew a pinch of reddish powder. Before Silas could react, she leaned forward and pressed her fingertips against his scar, leaving a faint red mark. "What are you doing?" he asked, resisting the urge to wipe it away. "Old ways," she replied simply. "Fire marks carry memories. Bad ones. This helps quiet them." Silas touched the mark, feeling the slight grittiness of the powder against his skin. "Does it work?" For the first time since he'd met her, something almost like softness entered Ayana's eyes. "It has for 1,000 years," she repeated. "Unless you think your white man's medicine is superior." This time, Silas's smile was genuine. "Not for this." They rode from the canyon as the last light faded from the sky, two figures moving like shadows across the ancient land. Behind them lay destruction and betrayal. Ahead, uncertainty and danger. Between them, the first fragile threads of understanding began to form. Not trust, not yet, but something that might someday grow into it. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, its cry echoing through the deepening night. Neither Silas nor Ayana mentioned how the sound resembled morning. 3 days of hard riding had left them both weary. The landscape gradually transformed around them as they climbed higher into the Mogollon Rim. Desert scrub giving way to juniper and pinon pine, the air growing cooler and carrying the scent of resin rather than dust. They spoke little during the journey, each wrapped in private thoughts, connected only by the common purpose driving them forward. On the afternoon of the third day, Silas raised his hand, signaling a halt. They had crested a ridge overlooking a narrow valley where a small trading post stood beside a trickling creek. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, curling lazily against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. "Nihele's place," Silas said, his voice rough from disuse. Ayana studied the modest compound below, a main building of weathered logs, a corral containing several horses, and a series of smaller outbuildings partially hidden by trees. Her eyes narrowed, scanning for signs of danger. "No extra horses," she observed. "No fresh tracks." Silas nodded, appreciating her caution. Still, we approached carefully. Blackwood's reach is long. They descended the ridge in a wide arc, using the trees for cover, approaching the trading post from the least visible direction. Silas kept his rifle ready across his saddle, eyes constantly sweeping their surroundings, while Ayana moved with the natural stealth of one raised to hunt and evade. As they neared the final stand of trees before the clearing, a voice called out from the shadows, "That's far enough." They reined their horses to a stop. From behind a massive ponderosa stepped an older Apache man, his leather vest adorned with trade beads and silver conchos. A patch covered his left eye, but his remaining right eye was sharp as a hawk's, missing nothing. Despite his age, perhaps 60 winters, he held a Winchester repeating rifle with the steady hands of a practiced marksman. "Nahele," Silas acknowledged, lowering his own weapon slightly. The trader's single eye flicked between Silas and Ayana, widening almost imperceptibly when it settled on the woman. "Thornfield," he replied, his English accented but clear. "You bring trouble to my doorstep?" "Not intentionally." Nahele's gaze remained fixed on Ayana. "And who is your companion?" Ayana straightened on her horse. "I am Ayana Nighthawk, daughter of Chief Kia of the Mountain People." The rifle lowered a fraction. "Nighthawk," Nahele repeated, tasting the name. "I knew your father, a wise man. They said all his family died in the massacre." "Not all," she replied, her chin lifting slightly. A moment of silence stretched between them before Nahele finally lowered his rifle completely. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the trading post. "It seems we have much to discuss." Inside the trading post, the air was thick with the mingled scents of leather, tobacco, dried herbs, and wood smoke. Shelves lined the walls, filled with an eclectic assortment of goods. Everything from basic supplies to rare items acquired through Nahele's extensive trading network. Pelts hung from the ceiling beams, and baskets woven by tribal artisans were stacked in careful displays. In one corner, European china sat beside traditional pottery, a visual representation of the two worlds Nahele straddled. The trader moved behind a rough-hewn counter and produced a clay pot and 3 cups. Into each, he poured a dark liquid that gave off a pungent, herbaceous aroma. "Desert sage and juniper tea," he explained, sliding cups toward his visitors. Good for those who have traveled far. Silas accepted his cup with a nod of thanks, while Ayana studied Nahele with guarded curiosity. The old trader returned her gaze with equal intensity. The daughter of Kiaya, he murmured. I see him in your eyes. He turned to Silas. Why have you brought her here? We need information, Silas replied. About survivors from her village, and about Blackwood. Nahele's expression hardened at the merchant's name. Ezra Blackwood, a man whose pockets are as deep as his soul is shallow. He sipped his tea before continuing. He has men searching the territory, offering rewards for any Apache matching certain descriptions. Young men, mostly, and a woman, a medicine woman in training. His eyes settled meaningfully on Ayana. She did not flinch from his gaze. I am not hiding what I am, she said. I was to be my people's next keeper of knowledge before the bluecoats came. And that is why Blackwood hunts you, Nahele confirmed. Not for revenge, not even for the satisfaction of ownership. He hunts you for what you know. The Valley of the Moon, Silas said. Nahele's head swiveled toward him, surprise evident in his weathered face. She told you of this place? Only its name, Silas admitted, and that Blackwood seeks it. For good reason. Nahele set down his cup. The valley holds what is most precious in this dry land. Water, not a spring or creek, but an underground river pure and plentiful enough to sustain thousands. Whoever controls such water controls everything in the territory. Ayana leaned forward, her voice low and intent. My brother, Dakota. This man, she nodded toward Silas, claims he helped him escape the night of the attack, that he sent him east toward Texas. Ah, Nahele's expression softened. The boy lives, or did, when last I heard. When? Ayana demanded. Where? 6 moons ago, a trading party from the east brought word of a young Apache living with settlers near the Pecos River. They called him Thomas, but his true name he revealed only to his own kind. Dakota, Ayana whispered, her composure cracking for the first time since Silas had known her. He's alive. Nahele nodded, but in danger, like all who survived. Blackwood's men have been systematically tracking the scattered ones, taking them or killing those who resist. Why now? Silas asked. It's been 5 years since the attack. Because now he has the means to exploit what he finds, Nahele replied. The railroad is coming. Settlements are growing. Water rights are more valuable than gold. And, his eye fixed on Silas, because you have been protecting them, Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider? Ayana looked between the men, confusion evident in her expression. A mirthless smile touched Nahele's lips. That is what the people call him. The white man who appears when Blackwood's hunters close in, who leaves silver bracelets at sites of remembrance, who makes those hunted disappear before they can be caught. Silas's jaw tightened. I didn't know I had a name. Among the people you do. Some call you friend, others call you ghost. Blackwood calls you traitor. Nahele set his cup down with a decisive click. And now you have revealed yourself by taking this woman from under his nose. The implications hung heavy in the air. Silas had operated in shadows for years, working alone, leaving no trace. Now, in one impulsive act of mercy, he had exposed himself to his former commander. The silver bracelets, Ayana said suddenly. You said Silas leaves them at sites of remembrance. Nahele nodded, for those he could not save. Show him, she commanded Silas. After a moment's hesitation, Silas reached into his saddlebag and withdrew one of the silver bands. He placed it on the counter between them. The bracelet gleamed dully in the lantern light, its surface etched with intricate patterns. Nahele's breath caught. He picked up the bracelet with reverent care, turning it to examine the markings. Where did you learn these symbols? I didn't, Silas admitted. I copied what I saw in the village, on posts, on clothing. I thought they were decorative. A sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough escaped Nahele. Decorative, he repeated. No, Ghost Rider. These are not decorations. These are words. History. Maps. That's what Ayana said. And she is right. Nahele traced the pattern with a weathered finger. Each bracelet tells part of a story. This one speaks of water flowing beneath stone, of passages only the initiated can find. His eye narrowed as understanding dawned. You've been creating pieces of a map without knowing it. How many have you made? 14, Silas answered. One for each. For each soul you couldn't save, Nihelo finished. Yet in doing so you may have saved many more. He looked between them with new urgency. Nihel carefully arranged the bracelet alongside the one Silas had shown him earlier, their edges touching. The patterns suddenly seemed to flow from one piece to the next, creating new symbols at the points where they connected. These bracelets are not merely decorative, nor are they separate pieces, Nihela explained, tracing the connection point with his weathered finger. When arranged in the proper sequence, a circle representing the phases of the moon, they reveal what cannot be seen by ordinary eyes. He demonstrated, positioning the two bracelets so their patterns aligned. See how this line continues? How the mountain on one becomes a river on the other? When all 14 are placed in their rightful positions, they form a complete celestial map, showing not just the location of the valley, but the precise time of year and position of the moon when its entrance becomes visible. Silas stared, transfixed by the transformation. What had appeared as separate tribal designs now clearly formed sections of a larger, more complex pattern. Each bracelet holds a piece of the secret, Nihele continued. The phases of the moon, the positions of stars, landmarks visible only when viewed from specific points in the desert. Chief Kia's bracelet, the eagle, is the centerpiece that orients all others. Like a key to a code, Silas murmured, beginning to understand. Precisely. Without all pieces properly arranged, the map is useless. Without the knowledge to read it, he nodded toward Ayana. Even the complete map reveals nothing. He already suspects, Silas interrupted. The night before we left, he burned my barn. They were looking for something. Nahele set the bracelet down as if it had suddenly grown hot. Then we have less time than I thought. You must collect the bracelets you have hidden and bring them here, all of them, before Blackwood realizes what they are. And my brother? Ayana's voice cut through the tension. What of Dakota? The old trader's expression softened. If the Ghost Rider travels east while you come with me, we split Blackwood's forces. Increase both your chances. No, Silas's response was immediate and firm. We stay together. She would be safer with her own kind, Nahela argued. And who would protect her on the journey to them? You're a traitor, not a fighter. I am not a child to be passed between caretakers, Ayana interjected, her voice sharp with frustration. I am a daughter of the mountain people and a keeper of knowledge. I decide my own path. Both men fell silent, chastened by her words. After a moment, Nahele inclined his head in acknowledgement. What does the daughter of Kia choose then? Ayana's dark eyes moved between Nahele and Silas, weighing possibilities against risks. The bracelets first, she finally said. If they truly form a map to the valley, we cannot let Blackwood find them. Then my brother. Silas nodded, relief evident in his expression. We'll need supplies for the return journey to Copper Ridge. And you'll need more than supplies, Nahele said grimly. Blackwood will have men watching your forge by now. Let them watch, Silas replied. They won't see us coming. They left Nahele's trading post at first light, their saddlebags heavier with provisions and their minds burdened with new knowledge. The trader had provided them with fresh horses, sturdy mountain ponies accustomed to difficult terrain, and guidance on the least traveled routes back to Copper Ridge. As they rode side by side through the pine forest, Ayana broke the comfortable silence that had developed between them. Ghost Rider, she said, testing the name. It suits you. Silas glanced at her, a wry smile touching his lips. I'm flesh and blood, not spirit. The best ghosts always are, she replied. Tell me about these bracelets. When did you begin making them? Silas's expression grew distant as he cast his mind back. The first one I made about a month after the attack, for a woman who died helping children escape. I didn't know her name, but I remembered the pattern on her shawl. I copied it onto the silver. And the others? Whenever I learned of another death, someone who'd been there that night, people who died later from wounds or sickness, or at Blackwood's hands when he found them. His voice grew rougher. 14 souls, 14 markers. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. You truly didn't know what the symbols meant? No, I just felt compelled, like I was preserving something that shouldn't be lost. He glanced at her. What do they mean to you? They are the language of my people, not in words but in symbols. They tell of places, of roots, of things hidden. Her eyes met his, measuring. My father was keeper of the sacred maps before me. He taught me to read the land, to understand the messages our ancestors left. The symbols on your bracelets, they're pieces of those teachings. So Nahele was right? Together they form a map to this valley? Not just a map, she corrected, a key. The valley cannot be found by ordinary means. It is protected by more than distance or terrain. Silas wanted to ask more, but something in her expression told him she had shared all she intended to for now. Instead, he changed the subject to more practical matters. When we reach Copper Ridge, we'll need to move carefully. The bracelets are hidden in different locations, some near town, others further out in places only I know. Will Blackwood's men recognize them for what they are? Silas considered the question. Possibly. Blackwood always had an interest in tribal markings, collected artifacts. If he's been hunting survivors all these years, he may have learned more about the symbols. Then we must be quick, she said, and silent as shadows. They rode through the day, descending from the forested mountains back toward the harsher landscape of juniper and eventually desert. As the terrain grew more familiar, Silas found himself watching Ayanna with growing curiosity. The initial hostility she'd shown had mellowed into something more complex. Not trust exactly, but a wary alliance tempered by shared purpose. When they made camp that night in the shelter of a rock outcropping, Silas found himself again the subject of her scrutiny as he built their small fire. Your hands, she said suddenly, they don't move like a blacksmith's anymore. Silas glanced down at his hands, scarred and calloused from years of metalwork. What do you mean? When you first brought me to your forge, you moved like a man who lived by the hammer. Now you move like what you truly are, a scout, a soldier. He didn't deny it. Old habits return when needed. Like making silver bracelets for the dead? The question cut deeper than she likely intended. Silas was silent for a long moment, staring into the small flames. Some habits are chosen, he finally said. Deliberate, not instinct. Ayanna's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She reached into her pouch and withdrew a pinch of the same reddish powder she'd applied to his scar days earlier. Without explanation, she moved beside him and once again pressed her fingertips to the burn mark on his neck. Why do you do that? He asked quietly. Fire wounds carry memories, she repeated her earlier explanation. Each time this medicine touches your scar, it draws the fire out a little more. And what of wounds that don't show? The question escaped before he could reconsider it. Ayanna's hands stilled against his skin. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, something like understanding passed between them. Those are the ones that need the strongest medicine, she replied, and the most time to heal. She withdrew her hand and returned to her side of the fire. They ate their simple meal in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Later, as Silas took the first watch, he found himself repeatedly touching the spot where her fingers had left their mark, wondering about medicines for invisible wounds and whether 5 years of penance could ever be enough. The moon had waned to a sliver by the time they reached the outskirts of Copper Ridge. They approached under cover of darkness, leaving their horses concealed in a dry arroyo half a mile from town. On foot, they moved like ghosts through the scrubland, guided by Silas's intimate knowledge of the terrain. From their vantage point on a low-rise, they could see Copper Ridge sprawled below, its buildings dark except for the saloon and a few scattered lanterns. Near the edge of town, Silas's forge stood in shadows, but the occasional movement of figures around its perimeter confirmed their suspicions. Blackwood's men, Silas whispered, waiting for us to return. How many? Ayanna asked, her voice barely audible. I count 4, probably more inside. She studied the layout, committing it to memory. Where are the bracelets hidden? 3 behind the forge, buried beneath a lightning-struck juniper. 5 more at various sites within a mile of town. The rest are scattered further out, marking places where people fell. We start with the closest, she decided, the ones behind your forge. Silas nodded, his expression grim. We'll need a distraction. Ayanna's lips curved in a barely perceptible smile. Leave that to me. Before he could question her, she had melted into the darkness, moving with such fluid grace that even Silas, with his trained eyes, lost sight of her within seconds. He settled in to wait, trusting her despite the misgivings that knotted his stomach. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Silas heard it, a haunting cry that raised the hair on his arms. It sounded like a woman's scream, yet not quite human, echoing from the far side of town. The effect on Blackwood's men was immediate. Two broke away from the forge, running toward the sound, while the others grew visibly tense, weapons ready. When the cry came again, closer this time but from a different direction, another man left his post, following the sound. Only one guard remained, nervously scanning the darkness. Silas moved then, creeping through shadow with the patience of a predator. He approached from the guard's blind side, timing his movements with the man's increasingly agitated pacing. When he was close enough, Silas struck, one hand clamping over the guard's mouth while the other pressed a knife against his throat. "Not a sound," he whispered. "I don't want to kill you, but I will." The man stiffened, then nodded minutely. Silas dragged him into the shadows behind the workshop, efficiently binding and gagging him with strips torn from the man's own bandana. "If you're found before morning, it won't be by my hand," Silas told him, before delivering a precise blow that sent the guard into unconsciousness. Free to move now, Silas made his way to the lightning-struck juniper. The ancient tree had been split years ago, its twisted trunk forming a natural marker. Beneath its gnarled roots, he dug quickly, unearthing a small metal box. Inside lay 3 silver bracelets, each etched with different patterns. As he secured them in his pouch, a whisper of movement behind him made him turn, knife ready. Ayana emerged from the shadows, her expression triumphant. "The hunters become the hunted," she said softly. "They'll be searching the eastern hills until dawn." "What did you do?" "Old Apache trick. Sound carries strangely in these canyons if you know how to use it." Her eyes fell to the pouch at his waist. "You found them?" He nodded. 3. Let's get the others before they realize they've been fooled." They moved through the night like spirits, retrieving Silas's hidden bracelets one by one from their burial sites around the perimeter of Copper Ridge. Each location seemed chosen with specific intent: a juniper tree, a rock formation, a dry creek bed. At each site, Silas dug with practiced efficiency while Ayana kept watch, her senses attuned to any approaching danger. By the time they had collected the 8th bracelet, the eastern sky had begun to lighten. Dawn was approaching, and with it increased risk of discovery. "We should go," Ayana urged, as Silas carefully placed the latest bracelet in his pouch. "The others will have to wait." Silas shook his head. "There's one more nearby, the most important one. It marks where your father fell." Her breath caught audibly. "My father? You knew him?" "Not in life," Silas admitted. "Only in death. He died protecting others, buying time for children to escape. I found him afterward, with this beside him." From his shirt, he withdrew a small leather pouch suspended on a cord around his neck. Opening it, he removed a carved bone pendant in the shape of an eagle. Ayana reached for it with trembling fingers. "The eagle," she whispered. "My father's spirit guide." "I buried him with honor," Silas said quietly. "Made a bracelet with the eagle symbol, left both at his resting place. I've kept this pendant with me since, not sure why." "Because it was meant to return to his blood," Ayana said, clutching the pendant tightly. "Where is he buried?" "Not far, a canyon with red rock walls beside a single standing pine." Recognition flashed in her eyes. "The Guardian's Canyon, a sacred place. We can reach it before full light if we hurry." Ayana hesitated, torn between caution and the pull of blood ties. Finally she nodded. "Show me." They retrieved their horses and rode hard through the lightning darkness, pushing the animals as fast as safety allowed over the rough terrain. The sky had turned from black to deep indigo by the time they reached the mouth of a narrow canyon, its walls rising like red sentinels on either side. Silas led the way, following a path visible only to experienced eyes. The canyon floor gradually rose, becoming a natural amphitheater encircled by stone walls. In its center stood a solitary pine, improbably tall and straight despite the harsh conditions. "There," Silas said softly, reining his horse to a stop. Ayana dismounted slowly, her movements reverent. She approached the tree, where a cairn of red stones had been carefully constructed at its base. Kneeling, she placed her hand upon the stones, her lips moving in silent words Silas couldn't hear. He remained mounted, giving her privacy in this moment of connection. The rising sun sent its first rays into the canyon, illuminating the scene in golden light. The red rocks glowed like embers, and for an instant, Silas could almost believe that the spirits Ayana's people revered were present, witnessing her reunion with her father's resting place. When she finally rose, there was a new steadiness in her bearing, as if some internal balance had been restored. She nodded to Silas, who dismounted and approached the cairn. With careful respect, he removed several stones, revealing a small hollow beneath. From it, he withdrew the silver bracelet he had placed there 5 years earlier. This bracelet was different from the others, wider, more intricate in its designs, with a central motif of an eagle in flight. He handed it to Ayana, who studied it with knowing eyes. "This is the central piece," she said quietly, "the key that binds all others." "I didn't know," Silas admitted. "I only knew it should be special for him." Ayana traced the patterns with her fingertip. "My father was the keeper of the sacred map. This bracelet contains the signs that reveal how all others connect." She looked up at Silas, wonder mixing with lingering suspicion in her expression. "How did you know to create these exact patterns?" "I didn't," he said simply. "I copied what I saw. His clothing had these symbols woven into it." "Not just clothing," she corrected. "His ceremonial sash, only worn by the knowledge keeper." She studied Silas with renewed intensity. "The spirits guided your hand, Ghost Rider, whether you believe in them or not." Before Silas could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the canyon. A rifle shot. The bullet struck stone inches from Ayana's head, sending fragments flying. More shots followed, peppering the ground around them. "Ambush!" Silas shouted, grabbing Ayana's arm and pulling her toward the shelter of the pine tree. Their horses, panicked by the gunfire, bolted back down the canyon. From the rim above, dark figures appeared against the brightening sky, at least 6 men with rifles, strategically positioned to cover every potential escape route. "Thornfield!" a voice called down, amplified by the canyon's natural acoustics. "Surrender the woman and the artifacts, and you might live to see nightfall." Silas recognized the voice. Jackson Reed, Blackwood's chief enforcer, which meant Blackwood himself couldn't be far behind. "How did they find us?" Ayana whispered, pressing herself against the tree trunk for cover. "They've been tracking us," Silas realized. "Probably since we left Nahales, waited until we led them to what they wanted." Another volley of shots kicked up dust around their position. Their cover was limited, and with 6 rifles trained on them from above, their options were dwindling rapidly. "There's a passage," Ayana said suddenly, "behind the tree. My people have used it for generations. It's why this place is sacred." Silas glanced behind the pines, seeing nothing but solid rock. "What passage?" "Trust me," she urged, pulling him toward the back of the tree. "Cover us with your rifle." While Silas fired upward, forcing their attackers to momentarily seek cover, Ayana knelt at the base of the cliff face. Her hands moved with practiced precision over the seemingly solid rock, pressing specific points in a sequence Silas couldn't follow. To his astonishment, a section of stone shifted slightly, revealing a narrow opening barely visible unless one knew exactly where to look. "Inside, quickly," Ayana commanded. They squeezed through the opening, finding themselves in a narrow tunnel that led deeper into the cliff. Once inside, Ayana manipulated another hidden mechanism, causing the stone door to slide closed behind them, sealing them in darkness. For a moment, they stood in complete blackness, their breathing the only sound. Then Ayana struck a match, illuminating a passageway that stretched before them, its walls covered in ancient pictographs. "The ancestors' path," she explained softly. "It leads through the mountain to the other side." "Blackwood's men will find the entrance eventually," Silas said, examining the ingenious stone door. "This mechanism isn't invisible to determined eyes. By then we'll be far away." She started down the tunnel, match held high. "Come, and show respect as we pass. The spirits of my people guard this path." Silas followed, his soldier's instincts warring with the wonder inspired by this hidden world. The tunnel widened as they proceeded, opening occasionally into small chambers where faint light filtered from hidden shafts above. The walls throughout were adorned with paintings and symbols, some he recognized from the bracelets he'd created, others entirely new to him. These markings, he said as they paused in one such chamber to rest. They're a written language? Not as your people understand writing, Ayana replied. They are memory made visible. History, wisdom, warnings, all preserved for those who know how to read them. She gestured to a series of interconnected symbols that covered one wall. This tells of the great drought 300 years ago, when the people nearly perished. And this, her hand moved to another section, speaks of the hidden waters that saved them. The Valley of the Moon, Silas guessed. She nodded. One of many names for it, a place where water flows from the heart of the mountain, pure and endless. And Blackwood wants to control it. He wants to own it, she corrected bitterly, to turn life-giving water into gold and power. My father died preventing that, as did many others. Ayana's expression softened as she gazed at the ancient markings surrounding them. The Valley of the Moon is sacred to my people, a hidden oasis nestled between towering cliffs of red stone. The entrance appears only during certain moon phases, when shadows align to reveal a narrow passage otherwise invisible to the eye. She traced a pattern on the wall resembling the one on the bracelets. Inside, a vast cavern opens to the sky, with walls that catch the moonlight and transform it into a silver glow that illuminates the entire valley. At its heart, an underground river surfaces, forming pools and streams that never run dry, even in the harshest droughts. Her voice took on a reverent quality. Plants grow there that exist nowhere else. Healing herbs, fruits that sustain life for months on a single eating. The water itself carries minerals that strengthen the body and clarify the mind. Our people have guarded this place for generations, using it only in times of greatest need, taking only what was necessary. She turned to Silas, her eyes hardening again. Blackwood would drain it dry. He would build dams and pipelines, charge for every drop, and turn a sacred gift into a commodity. The valley cannot survive such treatment. Its magic, its power, comes from remaining untouched, respected. And the bracelets are the only way to find it? Silas asked. They reveal the path, but only to those who understand their message. My father taught me to read the signs from childhood, the alignments of stars, the shadows at certain hours, the hidden markers left by our ancestors. Without this knowledge, even someone holding all 14 bracelets would find nothing but stone and sand. Silas's hand unconsciously moved to the pouch containing the bracelets, and these together would reveal its location. Not its location, she said, its access. The valley is hidden by more than distance or terrain. Without the complete key, a man could stand at its entrance and see nothing but stone. The implications settled over Silas like a physical weight. No wonder Blackwood had hunted the survivors so relentlessly. No wonder he valued Ayana above all others. As the daughter of the Knowledge Keeper, trained in the old ways, she held the ultimate key, the understanding that would make the bracelet's map useful. We should keep moving, he said, standing. How far does this tunnel extend? It emerges in a canyon 3 miles east. From there, we'll need to find horses. As they continued through the ancient passage, Silas found himself increasingly aware of the sacred nature of their surroundings. This was no mere escape route, but a physical connection to Ayana's heritage, a heritage he had played a part in nearly destroying. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could reconsider them. Ayana glanced back at him, her expression questioning in the dim light. For what happened to your village, he clarified. For my part in it. She was silent for several steps, the only sound their footfalls echoing softly against stone. When she finally spoke, her voice held a complexity of emotion he couldn't fully decipher. You were there, she said. You wore the uniform. You followed orders. Her pace slowed until they walked side by side. But you also saved lives that night, including my brother's, and you've spent years trying to protect the survivors. It doesn't erase what happened. No, she agreed. Nothing can erase spilled blood, but blood can nourish new growth, if we allow it. The metaphor struck him with unexpected force. For 5 years, he had been a man trapped in penance, defining himself by what he couldn't undo rather than what he might yet create. They walked in thoughtful silence until the tunnel began to slope upward. Eventually, they reached another hidden door, This one's simpler in design but no less effective in concealing the passage. Ayana manipulated the mechanism, and the stone panel slid aside, revealing a narrow canyon bathed in mid-morning light. "We made it," Silas said, stepping out into the open air. "But without horses, we're still vulnerable." Ayana emerged beside him, surveying their surroundings with practiced eyes. "There's a settlement 2 hours' walk from here, mostly Mexican farmers. They sometimes trade with my people. Will they help us?" "Perhaps, if approached with respect and truth." She glanced at him. "They have no love for Blackwood or his kind." They set off eastward, following a dry creek bed that offered some cover while allowing for relatively quick travel. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying as morning gave way to midday. Despite the urgency of their situation, they maintained a measured pace, conserving strength in the growing heat. As they walked, Silas found himself studying Ayana with new eyes. The past days had revealed layers to her he hadn't initially perceived, not just fierce determination and justified anger, but wisdom, adaptability, and a deep connection to the land and its history. She moved through the world like someone who belonged to it in ways he never would, reading signs he could barely perceive. "You're staring, Ghost Rider," she said without looking at him. "I'm observing," he corrected. "There's a difference." "And what do you observe?" He considered his answer carefully. "Someone who should have been destroyed by what happened to her people, but wasn't. Someone who carries knowledge worth more than gold." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Careful. You sound almost respectful." "I respect what deserves respect." She glanced at him then, measuring. "And what of yourself, Silas Thornfield? Do you deserve respect?" The question caught him off guard. "I'm not the one to judge that." "No? Then who is? The ghosts of the past? The people you couldn't save?" She stopped walking, forcing him to halt and face her. "Or those you did save? Those you continue to try to protect?" He had no ready answer. For too long he had allowed the dead to judge him, ignoring the living who might offer different testimony. They resumed walking, each absorbed in private thoughts. The landscape around them gradually softened as they moved east, the harsh canyon giving way to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and ocotillo. By early afternoon, they spotted the first signs of cultivation, irrigation ditches, and carefully tended fields marking the approach to the settlement Ayana had mentioned. As they crested a small rise, the village came into view, a cluster of adobe buildings surrounding a central plaza, with fields radiating outward like spokes from a wheel. Smoke rose from cooking fires and figures moved about their daily tasks under the watchful eye of the mission church that stood at the village's northern edge. "San Cristobal," Ayana said, "named for the patron saint of travelers." "Fitting," Silas observed. "I've been here before with my father," she continued. "The priest, Padre Esteban, was kind to our people, treated us as equals when others would not. Will he remember you?" "Perhaps." She straightened her shoulders, assuming a dignity that transcended her trail-worn appearance. "We shall see." They approached openly, making no attempt to conceal their presence. As they neared the first buildings, their arrival was noted. Children stopped their play to stare, and women paused in their work, some making discreet signs of the cross. An older man working in a garden set down his hoe and approached, his weathered face cautious but not unwelcoming. "Buenos dias," he greeted, his eyes moving between them with undisguised curiosity. "What brings a white man and an Apache woman to San Cristobal?" Before Silas could respond, Ayana stepped forward and spoke in fluent Spanish. The man's expression transformed from caution to surprise, then to something like reverence. He replied rapidly, gesturing toward the church. "What did you tell him?" Silas asked quietly when the man hurried away. "That I am the daughter of Chief Kiia, who once shared water rights with this village during the Great Drought," she replied, "and that we seek audience with Padre Esteban on a matter of life and death." "Will that work?" The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "In this land, water is sacred. Those who share it are not forgotten." Within minutes, they were escorted to the small mission church, where an elderly priest with kind eyes and a silver beard welcomed them into a cool interior, adorned with simple religious icons and local craftsmanship. "The daughter of Kiia," Padre Esteban said, studying Ayana with gentle eyes. I remember you as a child, when your father brought you here to learn our ways as we learned yours. You have good memory, father, Ayana replied. Some faces the heart does not forget. His gaze shifted to Silas. And your companion? Silas Thornfield, she said simply. Once an enemy, now an ally. The priest nodded, accepting this complex introduction without judgment. You come seeking help, I am told. We need horses, Silas explained, and perhaps a place to rest before continuing our journey. We can pay. Padre Esteban waved away the mention of payment. San Cristobal remembers its debts to the mountain people. You will have what you need. His expression grew more serious. But first you should know, riders came through our village yesterday asking about strangers on the trails. Men working for Senor Blackwood. Silas and Ayana exchanged alarmed glances. They're ahead of us, Silas said grimly. Searching all possible routes, Ayana agreed. These men, Padre Esteban continued, they offered gold for information. When none was given, their request became less polite. His hand moved unconsciously to his collar, where a bruise was partially visible. Anger flashed in Silas's eyes. They hurt you? They demonstrated their frustration, the priest replied diplomatically. More concerning is what they revealed in their questioning. They seek not just you two, but a boy, an Apache raised by white settlers. They believe he travels with a trading party bound for Santa Fe. Dakota, Ayana whispered, her composure momentarily cracking. My brother, Padre Esteban supplied, answering Silas's unspoken question. Travels with the Hernandez Trading Company. They passed through 3 days ago, heading north. He looked at Ayana with compassion. If your brother is with them, he rides into danger. Silas's mind raced, calculating distances and probabilities. How far to Santa Fe? 5 days hard riding, the priest answered. The Hernandez caravan moves slower, perhaps 8 days. And Blackwood's men? They left yesterday following the Santa Fe Trail. The situation was clear and dire. Blackwood had deployed forces in multiple directions, closing a net around not just them but Dakota as well. The bracelets they carried were now both their most valuable possession and their greatest liability. We need to split up, Silas said, the tactical decision forming with military clarity. I'll take the bracelets north through the mountains. Draw Blackwood's attention. You go with Padre Esteban's help to intercept the trading party. Warn your brother. No, Ayana's response was immediate and firm. The bracelets are useless without the knowledge to read them. And Dakota won't trust a stranger, even one claiming to help. Then what do you suggest? Her eyes met his, determination hardening her features. We stay together. We move faster than Blackwood's men. We reach Dakota before they do. And if we can't, then we face what comes, she said simply. Together. The word hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Whatever had started between them as captor and captive, then reluctant allies, had evolved into something more complex, a partnership forged in shared danger and gradual understanding. Together, Silas agreed, the decision settling within him like a blade finding its sheath, unexpected yet somehow right. Padre Esteban observed their exchange with the quiet wisdom of one who had witnessed many human struggles. Rest tonight, he advised. Tomorrow I will provide horses, supplies, and guidance on paths less traveled than the Santa Fe Trail. As they followed the priest to the simple quarters offered for their respite, Silas found his thoughts turning not just to the dangers ahead, but to the woman beside him, a woman who had every reason to hate him, yet had chosen to walk the same difficult path. Wisioi, he asked quietly as they paused at the threshold of the small room that would shelter them. Ayana looked at him, a question in her eyes. Why trust me with this, he clarified. With your brother's life? She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes seeming to look beyond his face to something deeper. Because ghosts don't bleed, she finally said. And twice now, I've seen you willing to bleed for my people. With that, she entered the room, leaving Silas standing in the doorway, struck by the simplicity and weight of her answer. In a world where words like honor and redemption had long since lost their meaning for him, Ayana had offered something far more tangible. Recognition of actions over intentions, of present choices over past mistakes. As the sun began its descent behind the western mountains, casting long shadows across San Cristobal, Silas found himself, for the first time in 5 years, looking forward rather than back, toward a mission that offered purpose beyond penance, and perhaps, if they survived, something he'd thought forever beyond his reach: forgiveness. Dawn broke over San Cristobal in a wash of amber and rose. Silas stood in the mission courtyard, watching as the villagers prepared the horses Padre Esteban had promised. Two sturdy Mustangs, one dun-colored, one black, were being fitted with supplies and simple saddles. The animals looked fresh and strong, capable of the hard riding ahead. "They're our best," said a voice beside him. Silas turned to find Padre Esteban, his aged face serene despite the early hour. "Miguel and Teresa have outrun wolves on the high plateaus." "We're grateful," Silas replied, noting the quality of the horses with an experienced eye. "But your people have already given so much." The priest smiled gently. "What is given freely carries no debt, Mr. Thornfield. Even when it puts your village at risk, Blackwood's men will return. They'll ask questions, and they will receive the same answer as before, that no strangers pass through San Cristobal." The old man's eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. "It is not a lie. In the eyes of God, a daughter of the people and a man seeking redemption are not strangers, but pilgrims on a sacred journey." Silas had no response to such wisdom disguised as simplicity. He merely nodded, accepting both the gift and the blessing implicit in the priest's words. Ayana emerged from the mission, her presence immediately drawing Silas's attention. She had washed the dust from her journey and now wore clean clothing provided by the villagers, a simple blouse and skirt that somehow enhanced rather than diminished her inherent dignity. Her dark hair, neatly braided, caught the morning light. Around her neck hung her father's eagle pendant, restored to its rightful place. "The scouts have returned," she announced without preamble. Blackwood's men were seen camped 10 miles north, where the Santa Fe Trail crosses the river. Silas frowned. "That's the most direct route. They're expecting us to follow the trading party." "Which is why we won't," Padre Esteban interjected. "Manuel will guide you along the old shepherd paths through the eastern foothills. It's longer by distance, but faster for those who know the way. You can intercept the Hernandez caravan before they reach the crossing at Piedra Blanca." A young man stepped forward, lean, dark-eyed, with the quiet confidence of one raised in the wilderness. "I know every stone and stream between here and the White Rocks," he said in accented English. "We will travel where Blackwood's men cannot follow." "How soon can we leave?" Ayana asked, her attention focused on the practical concerns of their journey. "Now," Manuel replied. "The morning shadows still hide the eastern trails." Preparations moved quickly after that. The horses were led to the eastern edge of the village, where the buildings would screen their departure from any distant observers. Padre Esteban blessed them with quiet words and the sign of the cross, then stepped back as they mounted. Manuel led them not along any visible trail, but through a series of dry washes and narrow ravines that wound away from San Cristobal like a serpent's path. They rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and the occasional snort of the horses. After an hour of steady travel, once the village had disappeared behind intervening ridges, Manuel spoke. "The trail ahead narrows. We must go single file." He pointed to a barely discernible path climbing the side of a steep hill. "From the top, we can see far across the plains. It will tell us if we are followed." The ascent was grueling for both riders and horses. The path frequently disappeared into loose shale, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals. By the time they reached the summit, the sun had climbed high, its heat intensifying as morning gave way to midday. Manuel moved to a boulder-strewn overlook and studied the landscape below through a brass spyglass. "No dust clouds," he reported. "No riders following." Silas joined him, taking the offered spyglass and conducting his own survey. The land spread before them in a vast panorama of mesas, dry riverbeds, and scattered vegetation, shimmering under the midday heat. To the north, the Santa Fe Trail was visible as a pale ribbon cutting across the terrain. No movement disturbed the stillness except for a distant herd of pronghorn grazing near a watering hole. "They think they're ahead of us," Silas said, collapsing the spyglass. "Waiting at the river crossing." "While we circle east," Ayana added, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Then north to intercept the caravan." Manuel nodded. "The Hernandez party travels slowly with many wagons. They will camp tonight at Blue Mesa. We can reach it by sunset if we ride hard. Then let's ride, Silas said, returning to his horse. They descended the eastern slope of the hill and emerged onto more level terrain, a high plateau dotted with juniper and pinyon pine. Here, Manuel set a faster pace, clearly familiar with the hidden trails that crisscross the seemingly featureless landscape. As they rode, Silas found his thoughts returning to the silver bracelets secured in his saddlebags. 14 markers of death, unknowingly crafted into pieces of a sacred map. The irony wasn't lost on him. How his acts of remembrance had created a key to the future. How his penance had preserved knowledge that might have otherwise been lost. "You're quiet, Ghost Rider," Ayana observed, guiding her horse alongside his as the trail widened. "Thinking about patterns," he replied. "How sometimes we create meanings we don't intend." She studied him with those penetrating dark eyes. Like silver bracelets that become maps? Like a soldier who becomes a guardian. Ayana considered his words, her expression thoughtful. "My people believe that all actions leave marks on the world, visible or invisible. These marks form patterns that guide those who follow. Even actions taken in ignorance, or worse? Especially those," she said with surprising gentleness. "The deepest tracks are cut by the heaviest burdens." They rode in companionable silence after that, each absorbed in private reflections as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves. The landscape gradually transformed as they traveled northeast, the plateau giving way to rolling grasslands where the occasional cottonwood marked the presence of underground springs. By late afternoon, Manuel pointed to a distant silhouette rising from the plains. "Blue Mesa," he announced. "The Hernandez caravan will camp at its base, near the spring." The landmark grew steadily larger as they approached. A flat-top print prominence with sides streaked in bands of ochre and pale blue, the result of mineral deposits laid down when ancient seas covered the land. Its distinctive coloration made it a natural waypoint for travelers in a region where landmarks could mean the difference between life and death. They paused at a sheltered hollow to rest the horses and scout ahead. Manuel, who had proved as adept at tracking as he was at pathfinding, studied the ground with careful attention. "Many horses and wagons passed here," he reported. "Yesterday, maybe early today, they follow the old Spanish road." He pointed to wheel ruts partially obscured by wind-blown dust. "The caravan is ahead, as expected." "And Blackwood's men?" Silas asked. Manuel shook his head. "No sign, but they would stay on the main trail, not cut east as we have done." "How far to the caravan's likely camp?" Ayana asked, her eagerness to find her brother evident in her voice. 3 hours, maybe less." Manuel glanced at the sun, now descending toward the western horizon. "We will arrive near sunset." They mounted again and continued their journey, maintaining a steady pace that balanced speed with caution. As they drew closer to Blue Mesa, Silas noted Ayana's increasing tension, the straightening of her back, the alertness in her gaze, the way her hand occasionally strayed to her father's pendant as if drawing strength from its presence. "What will you say to him?" Silas asked quietly. "Your brother." She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I have rehearsed 1,000 words over 5 years," she replied. "Yet now that the moment approaches, none seem adequate. He may not remember you. He was young when you were separated." "He will remember," she said with quiet certainty. Blood speaks to blood. The sun had begun its final descent when they caught sight of the caravan, a line of wagons and riders approaching the base of Blue Mesa, where a cluster of cottonwoods marked the location of the spring. From their shack-tagged point on a low ridge, they could make out perhaps a dozen wagons and twice as many mounted figures. "The Hernandez caravan," Manuel confirmed. "They travel with guards because of the valuable goods they carry." Silas studied the scene with a soldier's eye, noting the positioning of the outriders and the disciplined formation of the wagons. "Good security. They've done this before." "Many times," Manuel agreed. "The Hernandez family has traded between Mexico and Santa Fe for 3 generations. They are cautious, but fair." "Will they welcome us?" Ayana asked. "They welcome honest travelers," Manuel replied, "but approach openly. Their guards are quick to shoot at anything that seems like a threat." They descended from the ridge, following a dry creek bed that would bring them to the caravan's path about a mile ahead of its current position. As they emerged onto the trail, Silas raised his hat high, signaling their peaceful intentions to the distant outriders who had already spotted their approach. Two riders detached from the caravan and galloped toward them, rifles ready but not aimed. They pulled up 20 yards away, studying the newcomers with professional wariness. "¿Quiénes son ustedes?" called one, a weathered man with a silver-streaked beard and the steady gaze of a seasoned guard. Manuel responded in rapid Spanish, explaining their connection to San Cristobal and their desire to speak with the caravan's leader. After a brief exchange, the guards relaxed slightly. "They will take us to Señor Hernandez," Manuel translated. "But we must surrender our weapons first." Silas hesitated only briefly before unslinging his rifle and handing it over. But first, Ayana relinquished her knife with similar grace. The gesture of trust earned them a nod of approval from the lead guard. "Come," he said in accented English. "Señor Hernandez will hear you." They were escorted to the head of the caravan, where a robust man in his 50s rode a magnificent black stallion. Francisco Hernandez had the commanding presence of one accustomed to leadership, his shrewd eyes taking in every detail of the newcomers. "Manuel from San Cristobal," he acknowledged with a slight bow of his head, "and companions seeking an audience. To what do I owe this unexpected meeting?" Manuel explained their mission in his native Spanish, occasionally gesturing toward Ayana and Silas. As he spoke, Hernandez's expression shifted from polite interest to grave concern. "I see," he said when Manuel had finished. He turned to Ayana, switching to English out of courtesy. "You seek your brother, taken from your people 5 years ago?" "Yes," she confirmed. "A boy named Dakota. We have reason to believe he travels with your caravan." Hernandez studied her face as if searching for family resemblances. "We have one who matches your description. He calls himself Thomas to outsiders, but keeps his true name among friends." A small smile softened his features. "A skilled youth with horses, quiet but observant." Ayana's composure nearly broke at this confirmation. "He lives," she whispered. "Where is he now?" "With the rear wagons, tending the spare horses." Hernandez glanced at the sun, now touching the horizon. "We make camp soon at the spring. You will meet him there." His gaze shifted to Silas, growing more evaluative. "Your companion, he is the one they call Ghost Rider?" Silas straightened in his saddle, surprised at the recognition. "His reputation travels even in these remote places," Hernandez explained. "A white man who protects the scattered ones, who leaves silver markers for the fallen." "Some call me that," Silas acknowledged cautiously. "Then you should know. Blackwood's men came to my camp 3 nights ago. They offered gold for information about an Apache boy traveling with us. When we denied knowledge, they grew insistent." His hand moved unconsciously to a bruise on his jawline. "They said they would be watching the crossing at Piedra Blanca, where all travelers must pass." "How many men?" Silas asked. 6 that I saw, perhaps more nearby." Hernandez's expression hardened. "They did not endear themselves to my people." "We've traveled east to avoid them," Silas explained, "but they'll realize their mistake eventually." Hernandez nodded his understanding. "Then we have limited time. Come, we make camp, and you will meet the one you seek." The caravan proceeded to the spring at the base of Blue Mesa, where they formed the wagons into a protective circle, a practice born of generations of frontier travel. As the evening light faded, cooking fires were lit, and the routine of making camp transformed the wilderness into a temporary community. Ayana sat apart, her usual composure shaken by the proximity of her long-lost brother. Silas approached carefully, offering her a cup of coffee provided by one of Hernandez's men. "Drink," he suggested. "It helps steady the hands." She accepted the cup with a grateful nod. 5 years, she said softly. "He was 12 when I last saw him. Now he's a man who survived," Silas reminded her. "Thanks in part to your father's courage." "And yours," she admitted, meeting his eyes directly. "Whatever else happened that night, you saved my brother. I cannot forget that." Before Silas could respond, movement near the horse corral caught their attention. A slender young man was approaching, led by Hernandez himself. Even in the fading light, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same proud bearing, the same hawk-like features, though softened by youth. Ayana rose slowly, the coffee forgotten. For a moment, she seemed unable to move, as if the reality of her brother's presence had frozen her in place. Then, with a visible gathering of courage, she stepped forward. The young man halted, his expression transforming from curiosity to disbelief as he registered Ayana's features. He spoke a single word, so soft it was nearly lost in the evening breeze. "Sister?" Ayana's composure finally broke. "Dakota," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They moved toward each other with increasing urgency until they collided in an embrace that spoke of 5 years of absence compressed into a single moment. Dakota, though now taller than his sister, clung to her with the desperation of a child reclaiming a lost parent. Words tumbled between them in Apache, too rapid and emotional for Silas to follow, though he understood their meaning well enough. He turned away, feeling like an intruder on a moment too sacred for witnesses. Hernandez joined him, offering a flask of something stronger than coffee. "Family reunited," the trader observed, his voice respectfully low. "A rare blessing in these hard lands." Silas accepted a small sip of the potent liquor. "Too rare," he agreed. "Your part in this reunion? It was not small," Hernandez noted. "The boy has spoken of a white soldier who helped him escape the night his people were attacked, who sent him east with traitors." Silas said nothing, uncomfortable with recognition for what he saw as a minimal act against a greater wrong. "He has carried something for you all these years," Hernandez continued. "Something he said belonged to the man who saved him, to be returned if they ever met again." This revelation caught Silas by surprise. "What?" But Hernandez merely smiled enigmatically. "That is for him to show you, I think." They left the siblings to their reunion, moving toward the main campfire where the evening meal was being prepared. As darkness fell completely, the camp settled into the rhythms of a community accustomed to life on the trail. Sentries posted, stories shared around fires, plans made for the journey ahead. It was nearly an hour later when Ayana and Dakota joined the main gathering. The young man had clearly been crying, though he carried himself with the natural dignity Silas recognized from his sister. They approached the fire together, Dakota's eyes finding Silas with an intensity that suggested recognition. "Ghost Rider," he said in clear English, confirming Silas's suspicion that the boy he'd rescued had indeed grown into a young man of considerable awareness. "My sister says you are the one who helped me escape that night." Silas stood, suddenly uncertain in the face of this living consequence of his actions. "I did what I could," he said simply, "which wasn't enough." Dakota shook his head. "It was enough for me to live, to remember, to carry this." From beneath his shirt, he withdrew a small leather pouch suspended on a cord around his neck, identical to the one from which Silas had taken the eagle pendant he'd returned to Ayana. "My father gave me this the night of the attack," Dakota explained, opening the pouch. "He said if I survived, I must keep it safe until I could return it to the one who wore its brother." From the pouch, he withdrew a carved bone pendant shaped like a wolf, the companion piece to the eagle Ayana now wore. Silas stared at it, uncomprehending. "I don't understand," he admitted. "This belongs to your family, not to me." "The wolf and eagle are guardian spirits," Ayana explained softly. "In our traditions, they represent balance. The wolf watches the ground while the eagle watches the sky. Together they see all." She touched her own pendant. "My father carried the eagle. The wolf was meant for his successor. When the soldiers came," Dakota continued, "my father told me to find the one with kind eyes among the cruel ones, to give him this if he helped us." He held out the wolf pendant. "You are that one." Silas shook his head, backing away a step. "I don't deserve this. I was part of what happened that night." "And part of what did not happen," Ayana countered. "The complete destruction of our people." "Take it," Dakota urged, still holding out the pendant. "My father saw something in you even then. Something that made him entrust you with our future." The weight of that trust pressed on Silas like a physical burden. How could Chief Kiya, in the midst of watching his people slaughtered, have recognized something worth preserving in one of the very men participating in that destruction? With reluctant reverence, Silas finally accepted the pendant, its bone surface smooth from years of being carried close to Dakota's heart. "I'll carry it with honor," he promised. "Though I still don't understand why your father would choose me." "Perhaps," suggested Hernandez, who had been listening quietly, "he saw not what you were, but what you would become." The simple wisdom of this statement settled over the gathering like a blessing. Around them, the camp had grown quiet, the other travelers sensing the significance of the moment unfolding by their fire. The peaceful scene was shattered by a sudden shout from the perimeter. One of the sentries came running, his face tense with alarm. "Riders approaching from the north," he reported to Hernandez. "Many riders, moving fast." Silas was on his feet instantly. "Blackwood's men. They must have realized we circumvented them." Hernandez began issuing rapid orders, his men moving with practiced efficiency to secure the camp. "How many?" he demanded of the sentry. "At least a dozen, maybe more." Too many for coincidence, Silas realized. They must have received new information, known exactly where to find us. "There was another trading party headed south," Hernandez said grimly. "We passed them yesterday. If Blackwood's men intercepted them, they would have mentioned our caravan as the next travelers on the route," Silas finished, "and any Apache traveling with you." Ayana had drawn Dakota protectively closer. "What do we do?" Silas's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. They were outnumbered, and while Hernandez's men would fight to protect their caravan, they had women and children to consider. "The mesa," he decided. "If we can reach the top, we can defend a single approach." Hernandez nodded his agreement. "There is a path on the southern face, steep but passable. We used it years ago when Comanche raiders threatened our camp." "Get your people ready," Silas instructed. "Essentials only: water, weapons, ammunition. We move in 5 minutes." As the camp erupted into controlled chaos, Silas pulled Ayana and Dakota aside. "The bracelets," he said urgently. "If Blackwood gets them and you—" "He won't," Ayana stated firmly. "But we should separate them. Insurance." Silas nodded, quickly dividing the silver bracelets between 3 pouches. He kept 4, including the eagle bracelet from Chief Kia's grave. Ayana took 5, and Dakota the remaining 5. "If we're separated," Silas explained, "Blackwood won't have the complete set. And if any of us escape—" "We meet at the Valley of the Moon," Ayana finished. "Dakota knows the way." The young man nodded solemnly. "I remember the old teachings, the hidden paths." The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, spurring them to action. Within minutes, a small group had formed. Silas, Ayana, Dakota, Hernandez, and his son Miguel, plus 4 of the caravan's guards. The rest of Hernandez's people would remain with the wagons, presenting a normal camp scene to delay pursuit. Under cover of darkness, they slipped away from the circle of wagons, leading their horses toward the looming shadow of Blue Mesa. The path Hernandez had mentioned was barely visible, a narrow track zigzagging up the steep southern face. "We'll have to go on foot from here," Hernandez whispered, tethering his horse in a cluster of scrub oak at the base of the cliff. "The path is too narrow for horses." They began their ascent, moving as quietly as possible in the darkness. The path was treacherous, loose shale that slipped underfoot, sudden drop-offs hidden in shadow, patches so steep they required hands and feet to navigate. Behind them, they could hear the commotion as riders reached the camp below. Halfway up, Silas paused to look back. Torchlight illuminated the scene at the spring, riders circling the wagon train, figures dismounting, the flash of weapons. Even at this distance, he recognized Blackwood's tall form among the newcomers. "They're searching the wagons," he reported quietly. "It won't take them long to realize we're gone." "Then we move faster," Hernandez urged. They resumed climbing with renewed urgency, helping each other over the most difficult sections. Dakota proved surprisingly adept, his years with the trading caravan having honed his already natural agility. He frequently doubled back to assist the others, particularly his sister, guiding her hands to secure holds in the rock face. The final portion of the climb was the steepest, an almost vertical ascent that required them to form a human chain, with the strongest climbers going ahead to help pull others up. By the time they reached the summit, all were breathing hard, their clothing torn and dusty from the arduous climb. The top of Blue Mesa provided a natural fortress, a flat expanse of about an acre, surrounded on all sides by steep drop-offs. A cluster of massive boulders near the center offered additional cover. Most importantly, the path they had ascended provided the only practical access to the summit. "We can defend this," Silas confirmed, surveying their position. 2 men at the top of the path can hold off many." Hernandez nodded his agreement, already organizing his men to establish a defensive perimeter. "There is a small spring on the far side," he informed Silas. "Not much, but enough for our needs if we're careful." How long can we hold out here? The trader's expression was grim but determined. 2 days, maybe 3, with strict rationing. After that, he shrugged expressively. Silas understood the unspoken reality. They had bought time, not escape. Eventually, they would face a choice between surrender and a desperate attempt to break through Blackwood's forces. We need a signal fire, he decided, something to attract attention from distant settlements. The nearest troops are at Fort Defiance, Hernandez noted. 3 days hard ride from here. Not troops, Silas corrected. Naheli. If he sees our signal, he'll bring help from the people. Ayana and Dakota exchanged glances of surprised hope. The old trader knows the ancient signals, Dakota confirmed. If we build the right fire, then that's our plan, Silas decided. Defend our position, signal for help, and make Blackwood pay dearly for every attempt to take this summit. They worked quickly in the darkness, gathering what sparse vegetation grew on the mesa top to create a signal fire. Dakota demonstrated an ancient Apache method of arranging the fuel to create distinctive smoke patterns when burned, patterns that would be recognized by those who knew the old ways. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, they had established a defensible position and prepared their signal. Below, they could see movement as Blackwood's men discovered their absence from the camp and began searching the surrounding area. It won't take them long, Silas observed as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the base of the mesa. They'll find our horses, then the path. As if confirming his prediction, shouts echoed from below, followed by the distinctive figure of Ezra Blackwood himself gesturing toward the mesa. Even at this distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of white hair that caught the morning light. Blackwood, Ayana whispered, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. The butcher himself. Silas placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Stay focused. Remember why we're here. She nodded, mastering her anger with visible effort. Beside her, Dakota watched the proceedings below with the controlled alertness of a young warrior preparing for his first battle. It didn't take long for Blackwood's men to discover the path up the mesa. By mid-morning, the first attackers began their ascent. 3 men climbing cautiously, rifles slung across their backs. From their concealed positions near the top of the path, Silas and Hernandez's son Miguel had a clear advantage. Wait until they're committed to the steepest section, Silas advised the young man. Then we fire warning shots. Give them a chance to retreat. Miguel looked surprised. You would show mercy to such men? Not mercy, Silas corrected. Strategy. Dead bodies on the path would provide cover for those who follow. Better to force them back without casualties if we can. When the climbers reached the designated point, Silas fired a single shot that struck the rock face inches from the lead man's head. The climbers froze, then began a hasty retreat down the treacherous path, nearly falling in their urgency to escape. They'll try again, Silas predicted, reloading his rifle. Next time with covering fire from below. He was proved right within the hour. A new attempt began, this time preceded by a volley of rifle fire aimed at the top of the path, forcing the defenders to keep their heads down. In the cover provided by this suppressing fire, 5 men began the ascent, moving more quickly than before. We can't let them reach the top, Silas told Miguel. This time, we shoot to stop them. The ensuing exchange of gunfire echoed across the landscape, defenders firing down at exposed climbers. Riflemen below attempting to provide cover. 2 of Blackwood's men fell, tumbling down the steep path. The others retreated once more. By midday, a stalemate had been established. Blackwood's forces, now clearly visible as they established positions around the base of the mesa, couldn't ascend without suffering unacceptable losses. The defenders couldn't descend without being cut down by the superior numbers below. Taking advantage of the lull, Silas joined Ayana and Dakota at the signal fire they had prepared on the far side of the mesa, shielded from view from below. It's time, he said. Light it. Dakota struck a match, touching it to the carefully arranged tinder. The fire caught quickly, and soon a column of smoke was rising into the clear blue sky. Dakota adjusted the fuel, adding specific plants that caused the smoke to change color slightly, creating a pattern that would be meaningless to most observers, but clear as language to those who knew the ancient ways. What does it say? Silas asked. That the children of Ki'ia are trapped by enemies, Ayana translated. That the sacred artifacts are in danger. That help must come with the night. Will Nahele understand? If he sees it, Dakota said simply, the smoke will be visible for many miles in this clear air. They maintained the signal for an hour, carefully feeding the fire to sustain the specific pattern of smoke. When they were confident it had burned long enough to be noticed by any friendly eyes in the region, they extinguished it to conserve fuel. The afternoon brought renewed attempts by Blackwood's men to scale the mesa, each one repulsed with increasing difficulty as the defenders' ammunition began to dwindle. By sunset, it was clear they couldn't withstand another day of siege without resupply. As darkness fell, Blackwood's men lit fires around the base of the mesa, effectively surrounding it with a ring of light that would make any attempt to descend clearly visible. The message was clear. There would be no escape under cover of darkness. Gathered around their small, shielded fire at the center of the mesa top, the defenders took stock of their situation. 20 rounds left between us, Hernandez reported grimly. Perhaps enough for one more defense of the path. And water? Silas asked. The spring yields barely enough for drinking. By tomorrow, we'll be rationing sips. The reality of their position settled over the group like a physical weight. They had bought time, but to what end? If Nahele had seen their signal and understood it, help might be coming. If not, there is another way down, Dakota said suddenly, breaking his usual reserve. On the eastern face, a path known only to my people. All eyes turned to the young man. Hernandez looked particularly surprised. I've circled this mesa many times over many years, he said. There is no path on the eastern face, only a sheer cliff. Not a path for ordinary eyes, Dakota explained, but one my father showed me when I was small. Handholds carved generations ago, hidden by the pattern of the rock. Hope stirred within the group, quickly tempered by pragmatism. Even if such a path exists, Silas reasoned, we can't all use it. Blackwood's men would spawn a group descending. One or two might go unnoticed, Ayanna suggested, especially if the rest create a distraction. The implication was clear. Someone would have to attempt the treacherous descent to seek help, while the others remained to face what might be a hopeless last stand. I'll go, Dakota volunteered immediately. I know the path. I can move fastest. Not alone, Ayanna countered. I'm coming with you. Silas shook his head. No, you both carry pieces of the map. If you're both captured, Blackwood gets part of what he wants. Then who? Ayanna demanded. You? Yes, Silas decided. Dakota and I will go. He knows the path. I know how to fight if we're discovered. He looked to the young man. Can you lead us down in darkness? Dakota nodded solemnly. The path is in my memory, as clear as my father's voice. Then it's decided, Hernandez declared. You leave at midnight when the watch changes. We will create a distraction on the western face to draw attention away from the east. As the others discussed the details of the plan, Ayanna pulled Silas aside, her expression a complex mixture of concern and something deeper he couldn't quite identify. You're trusting my brother with your life, she observed quietly. Yes, he acknowledged, as he's trusting me with his. And you're staying behind to face Blackwood. Silas met her gaze steadily. I carry 4 of the bracelets, including your father's. If I'm captured, the map remains incomplete. That's not why you're doing this, she challenged. You're seeking absolution through sacrifice. The accuracy of her assessment struck him like a physical blow. Perhaps, he admitted, or perhaps I'm just doing what needs to be done, as I should have 5 years ago. Ayanna's hand moved to his arm, her touch unexpectedly gentle. The moonlight caught in her dark eyes, revealing depths Silas hadn't allowed himself to notice before. Something unspoken passed between them. Something that transcended the roles of rescuer and rescued, soldier and survivor. My father believed all souls could find balance, even those burdened by the weight of wrong actions, she said, her voice softening. That's why he gave you the wolf pendant. Not because you deserved it then, but because he saw you would earn it. The eagle and wolf must find each other to restore harmony. And have I? Silas asked, the question emerging from a place of vulnerability he rarely revealed. Earned it? Ayanna studied his face. The lines of hardship, the shadows of regret, but also the growing light of purpose that had replaced the hollow emptiness she'd first seen in Copper Ridge. Her fingers moved from his arm to trace the edge of the scar on his neck, a gesture intimate enough to make his breath catch. "You're closer than you know," she replied softly. My people believe that when two souls travel a difficult path together, they become bound by something stronger than blood or circumstance. You've bled for my brother. You've risked everything for people you once helped harm. The scales begin to balance. Then, with a decisiveness that belied the gentleness of her touch, she leaned forward and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was brief but deliberate, not a gesture of passion, but something more profound: acknowledgement, given forgiveness, possibility. In Apache tradition, such a gesture was rare, given only when paths were truly meant to intertwine. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, the weight of their shared history, blood and fire, loss and redemption, hung between them like a tangible thing. When she finally drew back, Silas saw something in her eyes he'd never expected to find. Not just acceptance, but a reflection of his own awakening hope. "Among my people," she said quietly, "we do not speak of tomorrow's trail until we have walked today's. But some paths are written in the stars long before we set foot upon them." Her composure returned, though her eyes remained soft. "Return safely, Ghost Rider. This story is not finished, neither yours nor mine. Perhaps not even ours." The word ours lingered in the air, holding possibilities neither had dared consider until this moment. Silas found himself unable to reply, the unexpected gift of her gesture leaving him wordless. Instead, he simply nodded, a promise in the movement. The hours until midnight passed with agonizing slowness. Final preparations were made, equipment checked, plans confirmed. Dakota would lead the way down the hidden path, carrying 5 of the silver bracelets. Silas would follow, watching for pursuit. Once on level ground, they would make for Nahele's trading post, where they might find allies among the Apache who frequented the place. At the appointed hour, as Hernandez's men created a convincing commotion on the western edge of the mesa, Silas and Dakota slipped away to the eastern face. In the faint moonlight, the drop appeared sheer and deadly, at least 300 feet of vertical rock face with seemingly no possibility of descent. "There," Dakota whispered, pointing to what looked to Silas like merely another section of weathered cliff. The first handholds. Trusting the young man's guidance, Silas watched carefully as Dakota secured a thin rope around his waist, not strong enough to support his weight, but sufficient to help maintain balance, and began his descent. With astonishing confidence, the young Apache found invisible holds in the rock face, his body seeming to flow downward rather than climb. Silas followed more cautiously, his larger frame making the hidden path even more challenging. The handholds Dakota had mentioned proved to be subtle indentations carved into the rock, almost indistinguishable from natural weathering unless one knew exactly where to look. Their descent was painstakingly slow, each movement carefully calculated to avoid dislodging loose rock that might alert the watchers below. The physical strain was immense, muscles burning with the effort of supporting their weight on the smallest of ledges and projections. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the ground when disaster struck. A handhold Silas had been gripping crumbled under his weight, sending a cascade of small stones rattling down the cliff face. He maintained his grip with his other hand, but the noise seemed deafening in the night stillness. Below, a shout of alarm rose from one of Blackwood's sentries. A torch beam swung toward the cliff face, though it fell short of illuminating their position. "They've heard us," Silas hissed to Dakota, who had paused his descent. "Move faster. I'll follow." The young man obeyed, increasing his pace despite the growing danger. Silas matched him as best he could, pushing past the burning in his arms and shoulders. The voices below grew more numerous and urgent as Blackwood's men converged on the eastern side of the mesa. When they were still 30 feet from the ground, the first rifle shot cracked through the night. The bullet struck rocks several yards from their position, but it was clear their general location had been spotted. More shots followed, peppering the cliff face around them. "Jump when you're 10 feet up," Silas called down to Dakota. "Roll when you hit, then run for the brush line to the east." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you, go." Dakota reached the designated height and let go, dropping to the ground with the agility of youth. He rolled as instructed, then sprang to his feet and sprinted for the darkness beyond the ring of firelight. Silas continued his descent, now moving with desperate speed rather than caution. Bullets struck closer as the shooters refined their aim. He was perhaps 15 feet from the bottom when a searing pain tore through his left shoulder. The impact nearly broke his grip, but he held on, gritting his teeth against the white-hot agony. At 12 feet, he decided it was close enough and let go, hitting the ground hard but managing to roll as he'd instructed Dakota. The landing sent fresh waves of pain through his wounded shoulder. But adrenaline carried him to his feet. Figures were converging on his position from multiple directions, torches and rifle barrels gleaming in the darkness. Silas ran, zigzagging to make himself a harder target, heading for the brush line where Dakota had disappeared. More shots followed him, dirt kicking up at his heels. A second bullet found him, grazing his side with fire. Still he ran, the darkness ahead promising at least the possibility of escape. He had almost reached the shelter of the brush when a mounted figure cut off his path, a rider who had circled wide to intercept him. In the moonlight, Silas recognized the white hair and commanding presence of Ezra Blackwood himself. "Thornfield!" Blackwood called, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded hundreds of men. "Enough of this foolishness." Silas skidded to a halt, knowing he was trapped. Behind him, more of Blackwood's men were closing in, cutting off any retreat. His shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, blood soaking his shirt. "Where's the boy?" Blackwood demanded, guiding his horse closer. "Gone," Silas replied, drawing some satisfaction from the fact that Dakota had escaped. "Beyond your reach." Blackwood's laugh held no humor. "Nothing is beyond my reach in this territory, Sergeant. You should remember that from our time together." He gestured to the men surrounding them. "Secure him and search the brush." The Apache boy can't have gone far. Rough hands seized Silas, disarming him and binding his wrist despite his wounded shoulder. The pain nearly drove him to his knees, but he maintained his footing through sheer force of will. "You've led me on quite a chase, Thornfield," Blackwood observed, dismounting to stand before his former subordinate. 5 years of interference. 5 years of undermining everything I've built." "You built it on blood," Silas replied, his voice steady despite his pain. "On the bodies of innocent people." "Innocent?" Blackwood scoffed. "They were sitting on a fortune in water rights, land that could support cities, railways, cattle empires. They had to be removed, one way or another." "So you massacred them? Women, children?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "I did what was necessary for progress, as I always have." His eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "Where are the silver bracelets, Thornfield?" "My men found 7 at your forge, but I know there are more." Silas maintained his silence, which earned him a backhanded blow from one of Blackwood's men. The strike sent fresh pain radiating from his wounded shoulder. "Search him," Blackwood ordered. Rough hands found the pouch containing the 4 bracelets Silas carried, including Chief Kia's eagle bracelet. Blackwood examined them with evident satisfaction. "Beautiful workmanship," he commented, turning the eagle bracelet to catch the moonlight. "And quite valuable, beyond their silver content." His cold eyes returned to Silas. "Where are the rest?" "Gone with the boy," Silas replied truthfully, "and the girl still holds some on the mesa top." Frustration flashed across Blackwood's features. "Always complicating matters, Thornfield. Always the conscience I never asked for." He gestured to his men. "Take him to the camp. Patch him up enough to keep him alive. At dawn, we'll offer a trade to those on the mesa, the bracelets for Thornfield's life." As they dragged him away, Silas took some comfort in knowing that Dakota had escaped with his portion of the map. And perhaps, if the young man moved swiftly enough, help might still arrive for those trapped on Blue Mesa. His last thought before pain and blood loss claimed his consciousness was of Ayana, her strength, her wisdom, and the brief touch of her lips that had carried both farewell and promise. Whatever came with the dawn, that moment would remain undiminished, a spark of light in the darkness that had defined too much of his life. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lone, haunting sound that seemed to call across the vast landscape. Whether real or imagined in his fading awareness, Silas took it as an omen. The wolf watches the ground while the eagle watches the sky. Together, they saw the pendant Dakota had given him pressed against his chest beneath his bloodied shirt, a reminder of a trust he had yet to fully earn, and perhaps now never would. Dawn broke over Blue Mesa in streaks of fire across the sky. Blackwood stood before the assembled prisoners at his camp, Silas kneeling at his feet, wrists bound and shoulder roughly bandaged. Blood had soaked through the makeshift dressing, but his eyes remained clear and defiant. Your proposition is simple, Blackwood called up to those still holding the mesa top. The bracelets for Thornfield's life. Ayana appeared at the edge, her silhouette proud against the morning light. And if we refuse? Then you watch him die, followed by each of you when hunger and thirst drive you down from your perch. Silas looked up at Ayana and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't trade, his eyes urged. The water is worth more than my life. The standoff might have continued if not for the sound that suddenly rolled across the landscape. A drum beat, faint at first, then growing in strength and number. From the east, riders appeared, dozens of them, Apache warriors painted for battle, with Nahele and Dakota at their lead. Blackwood's men turned in confusion, caught between the mesa and this new threat. The Apache force split, circling the camp with practiced precision. Among them rode familiar faces, survivors from the massacre Silas had helped escape over the years, returned now to defend their sacred waters. Impossible, Blackwood breathed, his composure cracking for the first time. You hunted the scattered ones, Silas said, finding his voice despite the pain. But you never understood. They were not running from you. They were preserving something worth more than gold. The battle was brief but decisive. Blackwood's men, outnumbered and surrounded, surrendered quickly. Only Blackwood himself fought to the end, falling not to an Apache arrow, but to a bullet from his own lieutenant's gun. Another betrayal driven by greed, the final twist of fate's knife. In the days that followed, as Silas's wounds were tended by Ayana's skilled hands, they gathered around a fire at Nahela's trading post. All 14 silver bracelets lay arranged in a circle on a blanket, their patterns aligning in ways only the initiated could read. My mother waits for us in the Boshilimani, Ayana said, her fingers tracing the symbols on her father's eagle bracelet. She has kept the sacred spring since the night of the attack, guarding it with those who escaped. Then we'll find her, Silas promised, the wolf pendant now hanging openly around his neck. Together. Dakota, sitting across from them, smiled at the word. The elders say when eagle and wolf join, the people cannot be defeated. And what of you? Silas asked the young man. Will you return to the trading caravans? My path leads to the east, Dakota replied. There are more of our people scattered there, waiting to hear that it's safe to return. Someone must bring them home. As the fire burned low, Hernandez approached Silas with a proposition. Partnership in an honest trading company that would work with the Apache rather than against them. Water shared brings more prosperity than water stolen, the trader observed wisely. Later that night, as Silas stood beneath the stars, Ayana joined him. Without words, she took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. 5 years ago, I would have killed you without hesitation, she said softly. 5 years ago, I would have deserved it. She turned to face him fully. And now? Now, he said, I hope to deserve something else. Wow. Her answer was not in words, but in the gentle pressure of her lips against his. No longer a farewell, but a beginning. In the distance, a wolf howled, and somewhere an eagle cried in response. Together, they would see what came next.